Chapter 9. The clocks at the Bayet are safe. A key rattled in the lock of the cell door. The door swung open, and the prison matron stepped into the cell. "Ten boom! Cornelia!" she bellowed, as if there were 40 prisoners in the cell, not 4. Corrie struggled into a sitting position on her cot. Every joint in her body ached, and every breath she drew was an effort. "Get up, bring your hat and coat, and follow me," the matron directed, and stepped outside the cell to wait. Corrie set her feet on the floor and stood up cautiously. She was still wearing her coat. It had been too cold to take it off since arriving in the cell 3 days earlier. "A hat," whispered the woman with remarkable hearing, still seated at the door. "A hat can be good or bad. It means you are leaving the building." As usual, the woman was right. Corrie was led down the hallway, out the door, and into a waiting car. She sank into the leather back seat of the car, where several other prisoners were also seated. As they drove off, Corrie stared hungrily out the window. Had the sky always been such a brilliant blue? Had the clouds always danced across the sky like that? Fresh air streamed into the car, and Corrie breathed deeply to fill her lungs with it. And better, it was sea air with a delightful, salty smell. The car glided through the prison gates and out into the streets of Ch.9. There were people everywhere in the streets, people walking, people standing on street corners talking, people walking their dogs and children skipping. Corrie could hardly believe it was real. Did these people have any idea how blessed they were? They were free to bathe and clean their teeth and read books and listen to music. Corrie was so engrossed looking out the window she hardly noticed when the car slowed and finally stopped outside a large brick building. The passengers were told to get out and follow a guard up the steps into the building. One of the passengers was too sick to walk any farther, and to Corrie's surprise, an orderly appeared with a wheelchair for him. Orderly, that's a vocabulary word. Worker in a hospital who performs non-medical tasks. Several minutes later, Corrie found herself in a large waiting room with rows of wooden chairs. After an hour of sitting and waiting, she had to use the bathroom. She told the guard, who called the nurse seated at the desk in the corner. The nurse took Corrie's arm and led her down the corridor. Instead of waiting outside the toilet cubicle, the nurse followed Corrie in and shut the door after them. "What can I get for you?" she whispered urgently. Corrie was stunned by her kindness. These days she wasn't used to anyone in a uniform being friendly towards her. Her mind reeled with possibilities. But one thing was more important than any other. Can you imagine? Good. A Bible. "Can you get me a Bible?" she asked. The nurse smiled. "I'll try," she said, and then she quickly unlocked the door and waited outside for Corrie. On the way back to the waiting room, neither of them spoke. It was another hour before Corrie's name was finally called, and Corrie entered a side room for a medical examination. The doctor felt her pulse, took her temperature, listened to her lungs and heart with a stethoscope. He said, scribbling something on his pad. Pleurisy. Now, pleurisy, vocabulary word. Inflammation in the cavity around the lungs. Normally, I would tell you to get plenty of rest and keep warm, but under these circumstances, his voice trailed off as he shrugged his shoulders. Corrie stood and walked to the door. The doctor followed her. In a low voice, he said, "Goodbye and good luck. I hope I've done you a favor reporting your pleurisy." As Corrie walked back to her seat, the nurse brushed past her, and Corrie felt a small package being pressed into her hands. She slid it into her coat pocket and kept walking toward her seat. Soon afterwards, the prisoners were led back to the car. As they were ferried through the streets of Ch.9 back to the prison, Corrie had two things on her mind: the package in her coat pocket and the doctor's words. She rested her hand lightly on the outside of her coat pocket while she wondered whether the doctor had really done her a favor. Would having pleurisy be a good thing? Would the Germans possibly let her go? Or would they transfer her to a hospital? Corrie desperately hoped they would. But she also knew that the Nazis had little patience with the sick and the old, and to them she was both. "You're back," 3 voices rang out as Corrie was led back into the cell. "What happened? Where did they take you? Did you hear anything about the war?" they all asked at once. Corrie sat on the edge of the cot and told them everything. When she got to the part about the package, she drew it from her pocket. Everyone gasped. Open it, they urged, like little children at a birthday party. Corrie tore open the newspaper the package was wrapped in and removed the contents one at a time. They were 2 small bars of soap, real soap, like the kind you could buy in stores before the war. She passed them around and everyone sniffed the soap's fresh, flowery scent. Next, Corrie produced a chain of about 10 safety pins. They, too, were passed around and admired as though they were a diamond necklace. At the bottom of the package was the best thing of all, 4 small booklets. Corrie lifted them up and kissed them. They were booklets of the 4 Gospels. She offered one to the old woman in the green dress. The woman recoiled. "Don't touch them," she said with horror in her voice. "It's the Bible," said Corrie, thinking she didn't understand. "I can see that," the old woman snapped. "Do you want to get us all in trouble? Get caught with the Bible and you get your sentence doubled, plus Culticost, for the rest of your life." Culticost was a dreaded word in the prison. It referred to bread and water rations with no hot food. The threat of Culticost hung over each prisoner in his or her cell just as surely as the single light bulb did. A prisoner got Culticost for talking too loudly, for singing, for spilling the toilet bucket, for asking guards questions, for walking on the seagrass mat. The list went on and on. Corrie laid the 4 Gospels on her mattress. "Culticost would be a small price to pay for these," she said. The other woman stared blankly at her. That night, Corrie lay on her thin mattress reading the Gospel of John. She could hear her father's voice echoing in her mind as she read. She thought about him reading aloud from the Bible to the family each morning and evening. She wondered how he was. She also wondered about the guests in the Angel's Den back at the Bayeux. Was it possible they were safe even with the Gestapo guarding the house? And then her mind wandered again to the doctor's words earlier in the day. "I hope I've done the right thing reporting your pleurisy." Had he? Corrie didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 nights later, the key rattled in the lock of the cell door. It was the prison matron again. "Ten Boom, Cornelia, get up and bring your things. No talking," she barked. Matron. That's a vocabulary word. Matron is a woman who supervises women or children. Secretly, Corrie slipped the 4 Gospel booklets into her coat pocket, pulled her hat from the peg, and followed the matron. This time, though, they did not turn right to head down the hallway, but they turned left. Corrie's heart sank. They were headed farther inside the prison. About 500 feet along the hallway, the matron stopped, found another key on a ring, and opened a cell door. Without even needing to be told, Corrie stepped inside. The layout of the cell was the same as the one she just left, but the cell was different in 2 ways. There were no other prisoners in the cell, and the cell had a window. The window was high up on the wall and covered with bars, but it was a window nonetheless. In this cell, Corrie would have fresh air and sunlight. She decided she would drag her cot over to the outside wall in the morning and climb up and look out the window. Before she went to sleep, Corrie scratched a mark on the wall beside her cot and wrote the date, March 6, 1944. Somehow she felt it was important not to lose track of time. And that's where we're going to stop for Chapter 9, Part 1.